Volume 1, The Record of Surviving on a Deserted Island. Chapter A, Bravely Fighting Against the Demon Wolf. Black night has given me black eyes, but I use my nostrils to seek for light. Tash, said Liu Zhenhan. Liu Zhenhan felt as if his nose was broken. He opened his eyes slightly and then quickly closed them again. The soreness of his nose had irritated the nerves of his entire eyes, and every part of his body was aching in a rather tantalizing way. After regaining his senses, Liu Zhenhan gradually felt that strength was slowly being replenished in his body, and the feeling of being exhausted had finally left. Enduring the tearing pain all over his body, Liu Zhenhan managed to turn over with great effort. The pain of his whole body was seared on the scalding sand. It was indeed sand. Liu Zhenhan could tell from the feeling on his fingers that it was sand. The strength in his body was slowly gathering. Liu Zhenhan opened his eyes again. A huge brownish-yellow fiddler crab strutted past right in front of his eyes, its beady little eyes glancing at Liu Zhenhan with what seemed like disdain, muttering a bunch of white bubbles in its mouth and scratching a faint mark on the sand before burrowing into the gravel. Liu Zhenhan was furious. Liu Zhenhan felt that the crab was looking at him as if he were a coconut. He was completely enraged by this contempt. He reached out from the gravel pile, grabbed this little thing, tore it apart in a few quick moves, and stuffed it into his mouth, chewing it furiously. The taste of this crab was not bad, with a faint salty flavor. While chewing on the crab claw in his mouth, Liu Zhenhan tried to stand up. All around was unfamiliar. There was a golden beach, an endless expanse of the sea, and the ebbing and flowing tides lapping at his ankles. On the distant beach grew plants that looked like palm trees. The wind was like the gentle kiss of a lover, carrying a whiff of the sea smell. A crab claw slipped silently from Liu Zhenhan's mouth. Old Liu's mouth was wide open, like a hippopotamus in heat. Where was this? Wasn't I on the battlefield in southern Xinjiang? Bullets, right, the sound of gunfire. Didn't I get shot? Fragments of memories flashed through Liu Zhenhan's mind like a montage. He lowered his head to look at his body. There wasn't a single piece of cloth on him. His whole body had been soaked by the seawater until it was a bit whitish. Only one of his feet was still wearing a sock. The grey polyester sock had been soaked by the seawater into a strange color. Liu Zhenhan ran his hands over his whole body. Fortunately, the body that he remembered being riddled with bullets was still intact. Old Liu yanked a handful of the chest hair on his chest. The stinging pain told him that this was not a dream. Where on earth was I? Liu Zhenhan couldn't figure it out no matter how hard he tried. The stinging pain in his nose brought him back to reality. Although the few movements he had just made were not of a large amplitude, his nose had obviously started bleeding again. Liu Zhenhan felt that there was liquid flowing on his lips, and immediately a familiar, all too familiar salty and bloody taste filled his mouth. Liu Zhenhan felt that his nose seemed to have become a faucet that couldn't be shut off. He couldn't care less about being dirty. Liu Zhenhan quickly took off the sock on his foot and pressed it tightly against his nose. This definitely wouldn't work. Liu Zhenhan turned around on the spot, staggered a bit, and began to observe this place. This was a small island. It looked extremely desolate. Even though the feeling of the wind blowing on his body was that of primitiveness. The beach where he was standing was the only slope on this small island. Not far from the beach was a huge fish skeleton. It looked like a whale. The skeleton had been bleached by the sun until it was a ghastly white. The part that was half soaked in the water had quite a lot of seaweed hanging from it. Liu Zhenhan looked at the ground beneath his feet. There were many colorful clams stranded on the beach soaked by the blue sea water. Liu Zhenhan's stomach growled involuntarily. The crab he had just eaten had been dropped when he was distracted. Liu Zhenhan's unique scout knowledge told him that these clams, including the fiddler crab he had just eaten, if eaten too much, would definitely cause diarrhea. On this desolate and dilapidated small island with no supplies or support, any illness would be a fatal threat. But he was really hungry. After a struggle between reason and reality, Liu Zhenhan unhesitatingly chose reality. The taste of these colorful clams was really delicious. Although they were eaten raw, it didn't affect their natural refreshing and smooth taste at all. Coupled with the faint salty taste of the seawater, they were even more palatable. Liu Zhenhan ate a dozen or so in a row, and he felt that his body had gained a lot of strength out of nowhere. The restraint unique to scouts still showed up at the crucial moment. Although he was far from full, Liu Zhenhan still managed to suppress his strong desire to continue eating. But he didn't even have the courage to look at those clams again. He was afraid that his reason couldn't restrain his hunger. Anyway, being able to survive on this deserted island first was the top priority. With this firm determination, Liu Zhenhan staggered to the skeleton lying on the beach. The skeleton was complete and huge. Liu Zhenhan suddenly had a feeling that he was really tiny. After carefully feeling the skeleton that shone like a rock, Liu Zhenhan took a fancy to one of the ribs on a row of ribs of the skeleton. This rib was broken at one end, and the broken end was very sharp. It was about 1.5 meters long. The other intact ribs were all around 2 meters long. Liu Zhenhan liked this one at first sight. Now he was extremely weak. God knows what wild beasts were lurking on this deserted island. This rib with a broken end was a natural spear, and it was perfect for self-defense. Although Liu Zhenhan was known for his great strength on the battlefield, now he was as weak as a newborn baby. There was no way he could be picky anymore. He searched the beach 3 times. There were many stones on the beach, but unfortunately, Liu Zhenhan could hardly pick up any of them. After searching for a long time, he finally found a fist-sized stone. Liu Zhenhan tried it with satisfaction and found that although it was a bit of a struggle, he could still pick it up. He pounded on the skeleton with the stone. He didn't know how many times he had hit it. Liu Zhenhan was almost exhausted before he finally managed to break off the rib that looked like a spear. Due to the excessive force, Liu Zhenhan lurched forward and plunged into the skeleton. A gash was opened on his naked belly by the broken end. Liu Zhenhan was startled. Some strength burst out from somewhere in his body, and he managed to wriggle out of the skeleton by himself. Liu Zhenhan lay on the beach for half a day before he caught his breath. He staggered to his feet. Looking at the gash below his navel, Liu Zhenhan gasped. He sat down on the beach again and carefully examined it. Fortunately, it hadn't stabbed any vital parts, and not much blood was flowing. Looking up, there was a strand of sparse black curly hair hanging from the broken end of the skeleton. Liu Zhenhan patted his chest. Normally not superstitious, he couldn't help but praise the gods and Buddhas in the sky. The situation was actually still pretty bad. The injury on his nose had been making him dizzy all the time. In comparison, the injury on his belly was really insignificant. Liu Zhenhan felt that his lips were extremely dry. He licked them and found that they had already cracked. His throat was also parched. Picking up the bone spear, Liu Zhenhan gave up the impulse to grind it into a sharp edge with the stone. Although the rib was curved like a Japanese sword in terms of its arc, Liu Zhenhan knew that he really didn't have the strength to fiddle with it anymore. For the time being, he used the bone spear as a walking stick and slowly walked up the slope. In a short while, the tide had started to rise on the beach. The seawater that had only reached his ankles before had now flooded up to his ankles. Liu Zhenhan felt that he was quite lucky. Anyway, when he showed up in this damp place, it was already good enough that he hadn't been drowned in the water. On the slope above was a hillside where thorns and red willows were intertwined in a jumbled mess. The island was quite large. There were even several rolling mounds. Tall coconut trees and palm trees were interspersed among the low red willows, arranged in a scattered and orderly manner. Looking around, it was still an indescribably desolate and bleak scene. Liu Zhenhan let out a grunt and staggered to the nearest coconut tree. He searched around for some stones to knock down a coconut. After pounding for a long time, those weakly flying stones couldn't reach any of the coconuts. Instead, a few of them landed on Liu Zhenhan's head, almost knocking him out. Damn it! Am I still Liu Zhenhan, the so-called human grenade launcher on the battlefield? Liu Zhenhan grimaced as he rubbed his sore shoulders and head. Looking up at the coconuts taunting him in the air, the feeling of thirst burning in his mouth grew even stronger. Was I, a real man, just going to stand here and stare at the coconuts on this tree? Was I going to be like the female soldiers in the female communication company before, only allowed to look but not touch, just for decoration? Liu Zhenhan, full of mischievous ideas, was angry. His eyes rolled around, and Liu Zhenhan had another idea. He found a vine from the bushes. Liu Zhenhan carefully took off the sock on his nose. His rare tenderness was on full display at this moment. Now he was like a groom helping his bride take off her armor. The sock was stuck to the blood. When he tore it off, Liu Zhenhan grimaced again. Fortunately, the blood had stopped flowing. Liu Zhenhan gently touched his nose. He felt that his nasal cavity had expanded almost 10 times. "Mom, I'm disfigured." Liu Zhenhan almost burst into tears. Although he was feeling sorry for his good looks in his heart, his hands didn't stop working. He put the blood-stained sock on the vine, tied up both ends, put the picked stones inside, and swung the homemade sling around in the air, making a whoosh sound. At first, he felt a bit strained, but after 2 or 3 rounds, with the inertia, it swung even faster. Whoosh! The stone shot out with Liu Zhenhan's hope, and thudded hit the high-up coconut. 2 coconuts that were stuck together fell to the ground with a plop, bounced twice, and then stopped. Thank God! Liu Zhenhan choked up. The strictness of the former company commander, Lao Geng, was really reasonable. Without his strict teaching back then, how could he have controlled the aim of the sling so well today when he was short of strength and hit 2 coconuts at once? The taste of the coconuts was good. Although a lot of the sweet juice was lost when the coconuts were hit by the stones, Liu Zhenhan was quite satisfied. People are sometimes really hard to satisfy, but sometimes they are especially easy to satisfy. Liu Zhenhan thought to himself. He felt that if he were a woman, in this situation, if someone gave him a coconut, he would marry that person without hesitation. The taste of the coconut meat was a bit like that of water chestnuts, very sweet. Liu Zhenhan couldn't help but envy those people with buck teeth. He felt that if he had big buck teeth too, it would be much easier for him to eat this coconut meat now. After eating the 2 coconuts until only a thin layer of skin was left, Liu Zhenhan felt full of strength. He picked up the sling and shot down all the remaining coconuts on the tree, and then tied them together with a vine. "I'll never leave coconuts when I sleep from now on," Liu Zhenhan vowed. Although there were only a few coconut shells left after eating the coconuts, Liu Zhenhan didn't waste them. He threaded them together with a vine to make a simple pair of underpants. Although it seemed that no one lived on this island, Liu Zhenhan still wasn't used to running around naked. Although this pair of underpants was a bit crude, at least it covered his private parts, and Liu Zhenhan felt a bit more comfortable. Subconsciously, he wanted to scratch his crotch, but when he touched the coconut shell, Liu Zhenhan gave a silly laugh. He felt that this hobby of his would be forcibly changed. He put an extra coconut shell on his head, like a helmet. Damn it! My look must be like that of a stupid Japanese soldier. Liu Zhenhan gave another silly laugh. Pushing aside the overgrown bushes, Liu Zhenhan aimed at a nearby mound. The bone spear in his hand was temporarily used as a machete. The afterglow of the setting sun had already begun to appear in the clouds. Liu Zhenhan felt that he had to find a place to settle down first. God knows what was on this place. After passing through the bushes, there was a red willow forest. Liu Zhenhan's appearance startled a flock of seabirds inside. The seabirds were obviously taken aback by this uninvited guest. A flock of grey seabirds soared straight into the sky. Liu Zhenhan was also startled by this spectacular scene and almost dropped the coconuts on his back. Under the short red willows was a thick layer of bird droppings and feathers. Liu Zhenhan tried stepping on it. It was very soft. Liu Zhenhan was considering whether to walk over it or go around it when a small thing like a squirrel landed on his shoulder. The small thing had a pair of long ears, a chubby face, golden satin-like fur, a bulging belly, and two big eyes that were rolling around. Liu Zhenhan looked at it in surprise, and it also looked at Liu Zhenhan. It was holding a wild fruit in its front paws and moved the wild fruit closer to Liu Zhenhan. Liu Zhenhan looked at the teeth marks on it and shook his head, refusing its kindness. Liu Zhenhan sized up this small thing. It didn't seem afraid of people at all, which made Liu Zhenhan find it quite interesting. Seeing that it didn't have much meat on it, Liu Zhenhan really couldn't have any dirty thoughts. He gently grabbed its furry big tail and lifted it off his shoulder and put it on the ground. "Go, little guy." Liu Zhenhan stuck out his tongue, stroked its small head, and made a face at it. Guoguo tilde the small thing let out a comfortable moan, and also made a strange noise and made an identical face at Liu Zhenhan, sticking out its pink tongue too. So cute. Liu Zhenhan pinched its small face, and a pleasant feeling of softness came from his palm. Liu Zhenhan finally felt that his gloomy mood for half a day had improved a lot. Looking at himself and finding nothing presentable, he gave an apologetic smile. "Go home quickly." Liu Zhenhan stroked the small thing's head again and stood up and walked towards the red willow forest. Liu Zhenhan saw that there were many nests on the low red willows. He had made up his mind. It was dirty down there, but whatever. Anyway, I'm not here to compete in a beauty pageant. There must be bird eggs in the nests. It would be nice to get a few and have them for dinner for the next few days. There were many bird eggs and also many newly hatched chicks in the nests of the red willow forest. Liu Zhenhan picked out a dozen or so bird eggs and filled his helmet with them. He didn't touch the newly hatched chicks. The seabirds circling in the sky were screaming. He didn't know whether they were praising Liu Zhenhan for having a conscience or scolding him for being cruel. Liu Zhenhan turned around and was surprised to find that the small thing was still following him, and it had actually taken a thin wooden stick and threaded the wild fruit it had just eaten on it, carried it on its shoulder, and was standing straight looking at him. Liu Zhenhan stared at it blankly for a long time. The coconut on his shoulder carried by the wooden stick thud fell to the ground, splashing the bird droppings on the ground everywhere. It's actually imitating me? Liu Zhenhan's scalp tingled. The small thing with its bulging belly walked straight over, its long tail and golden fur covered with black and white patches of bird droppings, carrying the wooden stick on its shoulder, with the wild berries threaded on it, looking like a proud general welcoming a triumphant return. Could it be? Liu Zhenhan felt his tonsils facing the air directly and quickly closed his mouth. This small thing was clearly laughing, its eyes squeezed together, looking very proud. Liu Zhenhan felt that this laugh was full of wisdom. It didn't seem like an animal at all. He remembered the story his mother had told him about animals being able to communicate with spirits. At that time, he was young and didn't believe what his mother said at all. Later, when the production team slaughtered a cow, his mother took him to watch. The cow waiting to be slaughtered had big tears rolling down its eyes. The shock he felt then could only be compared with what he felt today. Liu Zhenhan bent down, waved his hand, and the small thing immediately threw away the stick on its shoulder, scrambled up from Liu Zhenhan's arm to his embrace, pressed its small head tightly against him. Liu Zhenhan felt extremely satisfied, hugging the small thing and continuously stroking its head. The small thing also seemed to enjoy it, with its two ears like a rabbit's standing up high, making a happy moan like a spoiled cat. After a brief intimacy, Liu Zhenhan took this small thing that was neither like a squirrel nor like a rabbit and continued on his way. Liu Zhenhan felt that he could never leave this small thing again. The small thing was as agile as a squirrel, with excellent jumping ability. From time to time, it would jump into the bushes by the roadside, pick some berries or something and bring them back as if presenting.